Hi, so I'm Gabriella Taylor, and what I want to talk about today is something that I actually think is incredibly important, incredibly unconventional, and incredibly harmful if not addressed. It's something that I've personally experienced a lot of shame around. It's something that I used to think, and I may have unintentionally said these things because this is how I was trained early on. In the field of psychology, I may have even passed on these things unintentionally to clients at some point in my life. And it's something that is rampant in the new age personal development culture today. And I'm looking through the lens of the cultural hotbed that we've all been swimming within, which has formed us for a very for a very long time, which we know as the patriarchy. Patriarchy exists in you and me. It signifies a disconnection, a primary disconnection that separated us from ourselves, our bodies, one another, the planet, the earth that we walk upon, and to something larger and more beautiful and bigger than ourselves, something that might be spiritual or universal. And when we shifted into a world where suddenly God wasn't found in the stars and the sun above or in the peach that we just picked off of a tree to feed us, when God was put into a box and men began to acquire uh, cattle and land and women as property, we began to see, this decline of from a world of connection and safety into a world of scarcity and fear. And when I think of a lot of the contemporary personal development pathways that really hearken to spiritual traditions and personal, psychological traditions, these, to me, I'm looking at them going, oh, they were created by men, love men, nothing wrong with men. However, they were created from an antiquated, masculine, dominant, out of balance mindset. So a lot of the spiritual traditions that I've known that I followed have been very mentally based, not really any sense of how to create a loving, safe space inside of our bodies, a lot of distancing or attempting to transcend or move beyond. Psychology, relatively new. It's only been around for about 150 years. Some white dudes created it. Same thing, a mental construct that assumes that we have this capacity to be the supreme controllers of ourselves. And it wasn't until the late 90s where we had brain imaging that allowed us to start looking at these mechanisms that are happening in the brain that hugely influence our psyche. So I have spent almost 30 years now really through the process of learning how to live within a human body that went through a lot of abuse and with a diagnosis of complex PTSD. I've really had to learn a lot about what does it mean to heal? What does it take to move beyond the past? What does it mean to let go? And a lot of the current messaging out there is in fact neurobiologically inaccurate. And this is something that I feel is very important. But the thing in particular that I want to speak about here, and so again, just giving the context, the lens that I look through is the feminine brain, the feminine psyche, and also the soul. I see us as divine beings having a human experience. And so the thing that I find is very helpful to know what is not true. What is not true, but the common message is that the way we change our limiting beliefs is through changing our mind. This is an erroneous conclusion that was created at some point before the brain was understood. Because the reality is, in the most simplistic sort of way of describing it, thank you, Dan Siegel, for your hand model, the brain stem, midbrain, newer brain. So let's call this the upstairs brain. This is where the frontal brain has all the executive processing that gives us the capacity for analysis, rationale, logic. It gives us access to equanimity. It gives us access to be able to really sit back and evaluate. everything else happens then in the downstairs brain. This is the center of feeling, impulse, aversion, disgust, longing, desire, attraction, like get away from me. Ooh, I want more of that. All of the things that drive our those base tendencies that we can't really control, eating, drinking, addictions, uh, compulsivities, emotional reactivity, sensitivities. So much of this lives in the downstairs brain. The downstairs brain does not speak English. So, what does this mean as it relates to attempting to change a limiting belief through simply thinking new thoughts? The part of the brain that would think the new thoughts, let's call it the upstairs brain, has no neural pathways to the part of the brain in which the limiting belief is encoded. Because when we have had an emotionally impactful experience, for the good or the bad, at any point in our life, it gets brought into this beautiful reservoir of this memory bank that's known as our implicit memory. It's the felt sense of what does it feel like to be me, like inside? Do I feel alone? Do I feel supported? Do I feel safe? Do I feel wanted? Do I feel seen? And based on all of the lived experiences of ourselves or our parents or our ancestors, this makes up our implicit memory. And so implicit memory, remember, it's things that are emotionally impactful. Now, if there were things that were difficult and emotionally impactful that got stored in the downstairs brain because it was too much to process, the brain couldn't really fully integrate it because a lot of the goal with psychological integration starts with neural integration, where the brain can actually process difficult things with access to more of the full brain's wisdom and intelligence. So it doesn't turn into something that hurts us so much, where we have so many reactions as a result of. So these deeply held limiting beliefs that we might feel troubled by usually got seeded because of an emotionally impactful experience that was difficult at one time in our life. And it's so subjective as to what that is. And so once this gets stored in this downstairs brain, there's a sequencing that happens with our neurons that stacks these neurons, these beautiful neurons, six on top of each other, into this particular neural network that becomes a storage unit for our belief. So, in other words, just like if I were attempting to tell my hair to not be browned, because there are certain signalings within my brain and my DNA that are telling my hair to grow in a brown way, not in a blonde way. There are these mechanisms, these neurobiological mechanisms that are involved in our belief systems. And because there is a stacking function that lives in the storage unit of our downstairs brain that holds these limiting beliefs, we cannot tell our downstairs brain to think new thoughts and to expect it to change. It would be like, okay, hair, grow white hair now. I mean, that is kind of happening, but we can't command it. It's virtually impossible. It's neurobiologically impossible. And what does it do? It creates shame. When we don't understand this, it creates shame. It creates a feeling that there's something wrong with me. How do I know so much? I've been in therapy forever. I've read so many books. I'm bright, I'm self-aware. The part of the brain that has conscious awareness, it's like, oh my gosh, why do I still feel like it's not safe for me to speak up? So the part of the brain that's thinking that thought has very little connectivity to the part of the brain where that thought, i.e., that belief lives. However, the good news is that there are processes, there are these incredible phenomenons within the brain that we can utilize when we've been trained, when we understand the technology. This is something that I specialize in. It's called memory reconsolidation. And memory reconsolidation doesn't belong to anyone, but it's an understanding of how to cue the brain in certain way with certain sequences in which we can open the neural networks to that hold the limiting belief. Now we have we have a 5-hour window in which we can encode the belief with new information, and then within that 5 hours, it can restructure. So memory reconsolidation, it reconsolidates the neural firing patterns, reconsolidate, so we have a new belief. So to walk around telling yourself or telling others that, oh, just think new thoughts, think you'll have a new belief. This is unhelpful. It doesn't usually work, especially if we have a trauma history. So the kinder thing that we can do is to start to understand the language that our body and our brain speaks and how that shapes our psychology. Because what I have found that if we want to have a breakthrough in our life, we first must have a breakthrough in our brain. And so please ensure if you're teaching this to people, educate yourself on this. I didn't know it until I knew it. I used to teach change your thinking, change your beliefs. It's not accurate. I didn't know any better. Now I know better. So if this is something that you teach, and if you work within the tender sanctum of someone's inner world, please educate yourself on the physiological forces that actually shape our psychology. And if this is you, you're watching this, and you're somebody that has gone to the workshops, you've read the books, you've gobbled up the seminars, you might even be a practitioner yourself and wonder why you're still struggling so much. Please, I invite you to be gentle and to just open your mind to the possibility that there's this incredible intelligence inside of you that maybe you just haven't learned how to unlock to actually reshape these internal implicit memories, these limiting beliefs in a way that actually does deliver lasting change. So I would love to hear how this is for you. I'd love to hear any of the new books that you might be reading, any of the new practices that you might be discovering that support you in this. And please, please be gentle with yourself, be compassionate with yourself if there are these deeply held beliefs that you have been struggling to transform by mental processing alone. I wish you all the best, and I will see you soon.